Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. In a world where everybody is trying to escape from popping pills or going to the therapist to find their own ways to be able to get back on track and just enjoy a reasonably blissful life, there is another opportunity out there that one might not consider that is available and has actually been available for many, 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 many years. We all love when we get out in the garden and we see a beautiful rose or a daisy or perhaps a tulip, but we didn't realize, for instance, that flowers probably hold more of a value for healing than just the scent and the sight that they provide to us. Guest joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today has produced a book simply titled Australian, Bush Flower Essences. And our guest joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program today is a highly respected practitioner and teacher of natural therapy and kinesthesiology. And he's going to be talking with us today about what bush flower essences can do for you. And I'd like to welcome to our program today our guest, Ian White. Ian, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
It's a pleasure, Daniel. Nice to be with you.
You know, it's interesting because in the many years that I've been doing radio, and there are a lot of natural modalities and therapies out there, it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I had even heard of something like flower essences. So if you could enlighten our audience about what a flower essence exactly does.
Flower essences are predominantly working on the emotional states a person has, so addressing things such as fear, anger, self-esteem, guilt. And the premise, which goes back many thousands of years in Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, is that our physical symptoms stem from emotional imbalances. So that if you have a lot of fear, then the kidneys are going to be affected. If the heart chakra is closed down, then it's going to affect the heart, for example. If the person is very angry, then the liver gets affected. So as well as treating those symptoms, it's probably more effective if you can treat the cause of what's underlying behind the symptoms. And that's where flower essences is a very powerful modality in that it'll treat the emotional triggers which bring about, say, at least 90% of our physical illnesses. The other good thing about flower essences is they're totally safe. There's absolutely no side effects, which is very rare for a healing modality.
Mm-hmm. No side effects whatsoever, really?
Unless a person would be, maybe we should backtrack a little bit then. The flowers contain the highest healing principle of the plant. So by extracting the healing energy of the flower, you get the healing power of the whole plant. Traditionally, you mentioned you've only heard of it, more recently, but it goes back over 3,000 years ago. The Egyptians collecting the dew of plants in the morning to treat emotional imbalances. There was a woman called Hildegard von Bingen. She was actually classified as a prophet by the Catholic Church, and she had a monastery in Bingen in Germany, which is on the Rhine. And in the 1100s, she would have her nuns put muslin sheets out over the garden at night, and they would absorb the dew of the plants. They'd be brought in, the dew would be wrung out, and they would give it to people suffering various illnesses. And there's a very famous healer called Paracelsus in the 16th century who also used to collect the dew of plants to treat emotional states. And in the 1930s, there was an English doctor called Edward Bach, or some pronounce it Batch, and he was a homeopath as well as a medical specialist, and he started working with flower essences again, and he found it was a bit time-consuming collecting the dew of the plant, so he simulated what nature was doing by picking the flowers under ideal conditions, putting them in water, and the sun would release that healing vibration of the plant into the water. That water was then diluted a number of stages, so when someone takes a dose of a flower essence, it's actually in a liquid form, and you only need a few drops, like usually with a bush essence, it's 7 drops on rising, 7 drops on retiring. Now, to make sure that you don't get bacteria or mold developing in the bottle, brandy is used as a preserving agent. So unless someone had an allergy to brandy, there'd be no side effects from the remedy. Occasionally, symptoms might get a little bit more intense. If someone was suffering from a lot of shyness, that shyness might get a little bit stronger for a couple of days. The person would still be able to deal quite effectively in life, and then it would start to balance out. And we had a number of case histories of children, 7, 8 years old, who had learning problems, in particular difficulty in speaking. And one child hardly said anything, and she was sort of 8, and went into a practitioner's rooms that particular bush essence was prescribed, and then she didn't stop speaking for 3 days, at which point the parents were thinking to themselves, it used to be a bit better before when she never said anything. But then that came into a balance. So, that's called a healing crisis, when the symptoms get a little bit more intense for just a day or two, and then they settle down. So that can happen, but in terms of aggravation, side effects, you don't get them with the flower essences.
That's interesting. So here was someone who wasn't really saying much of anything, and then you started implementing, or it was implemented, a flower essence therapy, for lack of a better word, and then she just couldn't seem to let anybody get a word in edgewise. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, we've had parents break down in tears because they've been with a practitioner, and again, they're being given one dose of this particular remedy, which is called cognizance, and the child said their first sentence in their life. So, in fact, we have predominantly working on the emotional states, but there are some working on a mental level, like the cognizance is very good for dyslexia, all sorts of learning problems, and we have many speech pathologists working with autistic children, or children with that autistic syndrome, like Asperger's and dyspraxia, and a lot of speech difficulties of those children. And so many of the speech pathologists now use that particular remedy to help the children with their speaking.
Now, how was it first discovered? I know you gave a brief history there, but how was it first discovered that flower essences would be able to, I guess, balance emotional states?
Well, it's a very good question. I suppose if we look at traditional cultures, how did they know that any plant did any particular thing? I think there's probably one of the very important factors in determining this is called the Doctrine of Signatures, which is a herbal term. And I apologise to your listeners if they're in the States, because in Australia we call it herbal. I know you pronounce it herbal. And whereby the shape, the colour, and the location where the plant grows are all clues that nature gives as to the healing quality of the plant. So, for example, being on the West Coast, if you're in Washington or even up to Vancouver way, British Columbia, you'll find there's a plant called skunk cabbage, and it grows in really boggy areas. It smells quite purulent, and it's used for bronchitis and all that gunk that people can bring up. So the fact of where it grows and that wet, sluggish, slimy type of product the plant has are clues that indicates it's working on the lungs. There are some plants where the seed is shaped just like a kidney, so that's an indication that the plant is working on a kidney. So the Doctrine of Signatures is a very important facet. Obviously, there was trial and error as well. Mm-hmm. And look, I think there was just that traditional wisdom where some people in the tribe were regarded as the seers and would be able to bring down information about the qualities of plants, and that's very common in all traditional culture. So I'm sure the original people doing the work and the research of the flower essences, would incorporate all three techniques.
Now, why brandy? Why was that used as part of the flower essence?
Well, it's interesting. My father was a pharmacist. In fact, my whole family, and he was also a herbalist. My whole family had been herbalists in Australia for 5 generations now. And when he was retiring, I asked him to give me a drum of ethanol, about 40-gallon drum. And I thought that would be a good preservative. However, it's quite inert. The vibration didn't fit in very well with the flower essences. Brandy is one of the few alcohols which is actually alive. There's also a connection back to, I mentioned the more modern founder of flower essences, Dr. Edward Batch, where he developed 38 remedies from England. And he had oak and also vine. Of course, brandy is derived from grapes which grow on a vine and matured in oak barrels. But, so gin, vodka are inert, but brandy has a life force. And with brandy in there, you get a shelf life of about 3 years. You can use alternatives. You can use vegetable glycerin. You can use acetic acid, which is basically like vinegar. But they'll give you a very short shelf life, just a number of months.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think it's really fascinating, just the whole thing. I mean, this is flower essences from Australia, and you think of the culture of the Aboriginals, And anybody who's really taken the time to even learn about indigenous cultures, it's fascinating how, to me, this is the way I view it over the many years that I've been not only doing the program but interested in just the idea of the human existence and the human condition, is how it seems the earth and the universe communicate through these people so well, and how they begin to grasp and understand the scape of the land of which they live, and they become fantastic stewards of this. It only makes sense that, in time, for instance, let's say you might find, an Indian of the Amazon jungle that says precisely these are the plants or these are the flowers that you may need to use for this, and somebody might be a PhD in chemistry from Harvard saying, well, how do you know this? Well, it just was dreamed into me. It's almost, it is as though the energy field is really communicating, this is what I see you need, and here's how you go about doing this. Can you describe that, I guess, symbiosis of how it is in Australia with the Aboriginals and how all of this works, if you can?
Yes, and it's not, and I might just add, it's just not restricted to Aborigines of various cultures as well. What my understanding is that as society changes, as the needs of society change, essences will come down and work through it. So certainly we've had traditional people working with the flower essences in all cultures, like we've got it in Asia, for example. They'll work with the flowers, usually picking them in the morning, placing them in water, large body of water, under the sun all day, and the person will be taking the remedy will bathe in that water in the evening. In Brazil, they used to float flowers in water, and then person would drink the water. And they would use 7 different types of water, depending on the emotional state. So if someone was dealing with a lot of anger or violence, then they would collect water from a thunderstorm, for example. Now, there's a tree...
Well, hold on just a minute there. That was interesting, Ian, as you said,
Yep.
If someone is, say, in a violent or aggravated state, then you would collect the water that you'd get from a thunderstorm?
Yeah, no,
that's interesting. Go ahead.
And on that similar principle, if they were dealing with a very old pattern that person had for a long time, then they collect water from a deep well to put the flowers in that. Now, there was a tribe in the northwest of Australia. If they'd work with a particular tree called the boab tree. Now, when a woman was going to go into labour during the flowering time of that tree, someone would collect the flowers. The woman would go off by herself, dig a hole, line it with the boab flowers, and deliver that baby into the boab-lined hole of flowers. Now, boab has the quality of clearing the negative emotional patterns which get passed down generationally.
Okay.
So in the child's first contact with anything in the earth was directly with the boab flower. My grandmother and great-grandmother were the first white people to seriously study medicinal properties of Australian plants. Now, unfortunately, when the white settlers came to Australia, and it's not that long ago, it's only 230 years ago, they smallpox influenza wiped out a lot of traditional people, so a lot of that knowledge was lost. So, white people can certainly do it as well. There's a remedy we call electro, and we've been donating that remedy for many years now to Green Cross, which is like a sister organisation to Red Cross, but it's dealing with more environmental issues. Now, there's a plant that I've been doing research on, which is the main component of that, called the murmula. Murmula is a very good plant for any radiation. Now, that could be solar radiation. It could also be gamma radiation when you're in a plane, X-rays. But we've also found it's particularly potent in dealing with nuclear radiation. Now, Belarus was directly downwind from the Chernobyl nuclear plant meltdown, so they received the worst radiation, followed by the Ukraine. Each year, the medical specialists from Green Cross, and this is neurologists and many different medical specialists, they'll do testing on the children in Belarus to find out which children have the highest levels of nuclear radiation. And in the summer, they're taken to the Alps in Belarus, and various treatments are given to them to try and reduce the radiation levels. Now, our combination electro is found to be the most potent remedy, or any treatment they've come for reducing radiation levels from Chernobyl. reducing it by 43% and after 2 weeks. So this is very typical of, as I said, when there's a need coming into the society, essences will become available, as they have, for millennia, where that information comes down. We've also got the point sort of now with digital phones, wireless computers, that there is so much electromagnetic radiation that we're all being exposed to. We can think of cell phones with children putting up and being on the cell phones for many hours, starting to get brain tumours on the side of the head where they put that. And of course, a child doesn't get the thickness in the skull until they're around about 16, similar to an adult. There's also more fluid in the brain of a child, so it's a better medium to transmit the electromagnetic radiation. Now, certainly there's great advantages in our modern technology. Here I am being able to, speak to you quite easily from the other side of the world. However, there's side effects from that. But at the same time, nature is also providing us with ways of negating and dramatically reducing those side effects. Now, when Edward Barker, Aborigines, thousands of years ago working fluorescence, there wasn't a need for that particular remedy, but certainly we have a great need for it now. So that plant will come down as society has a need. It's a matter of having people receptive, tuned in, to be able to do that research and be aware of what's available for us.
Mm-hmm. It's really fascinating because there were a couple of points to make here. The first one is we've been, over the last 2 years, interviewing through a series of books, the first one titled Anastasia, which was a book that was produced out of Russia. And it's about a young woman who was actually raised in the taiga forests of Russia, completely alone outside of nature, but raised by her grandfather and great-grandfather. And one of the things she talks about, and this is in line with what you were saying about how nature and plants seem to create a symbiosis whenever a malady seems to arise, as you were discussing about Chernobyl there earlier, and radiation rates, and then all of a sudden the natural world comes in with a way to say, okay, here's something that can help alleviate that. And one of the things that Anastasia suggests in her book is this, that as you grow your own garden, what you need to do with water is that you go out and you wash your feet into the garden and you wash your hands, not with soap, just the water itself. What will happen is then your garden will begin to, through the water, detect energy from your body in particular ways so that it can adjust itself for the greatest levels of not just energy and nutrition, but for any healing that you need. So it's like a plant is literally saying, I'm here to serve you, just love me. And it seems like this bush flower essence is exactly that.
It is, and there's tremendous healing in nature. Another thing which I'm sure many of the listeners would be aware of is the community in Scotland called Findhorn, and that was set up on very barren soil on the coast of the northeast Scotland. And as a result of communicating with the nature spirits, the devas of the plants, told where they wanted to be planted and what they wanted growing next to it, they were able to produce tremendous bounty on what would be, was classified as barren soil. So we can get, as you're saying with the Anastasia, how you can, in your own small area, how you can get the plants producing things for your specific healing, but also in terms of how we can cooperate with nature, we can get tremendous more bounty than using superphosphates with all their side effects, etc., and monocrops. So I think nature has got tremendous wisdom. We've just got to be a bit more aware of tuning in and how can we cooperate more.
Exactly. Now, I'm going to go ahead and dive into your book a little bit to give our listeners an idea of flower essences and how they can work or what types of things they can help. And I'm just going to cover a couple of them and see how this kind of turns out. Now, because we're addressing beyond 50, if you will, people who are approaching into or past midlife, baldness is something that definitely occurs in men. Maybe not all men and not all races of men, but it does occur. And you have a couple of flowers here that will do that. Now, what exactly will they do for baldness? We've got the dog rose, Hibbertia, I believe, and yellow cowslip orchid.
Okay. And there is probably a couple others. One of the ones, as many men would be aware, that there's a hereditary component coming through. It's often related to the men on the mother's side of the family. So if there's early hair loss, and basically 10% of men each decade start losing their hair. So the BOAB, which is the one we mentioned, the Aborigines clearing negative family patterns, is also working on genetic tendencies. So that would certainly be one. The Hybertia and the yellow cowslip orchid, the yellow flowers, working very much on intellect. And there's a body type amongst men, especially the taller ones, and their pituitary is very active. They're very thinking, the key phrase, I think. So there's a lot of frontal lobe activity, which can also have an impact if they're losing hair at the very beginning, top of the head. There's another remedy called tall murmur, which increases circulation. Now, as many people working in that area know, if we increase the blood supply, if there is, it can stimulate new hair growth and also keep good nutrients to the existing hair and follicles up there as well. Now, the other thing that the essences are very good for is dealing with the reaction some men can have. So for some people, it could be a feeling of embarrassment or shame that they're losing their hair when it first happens. So we've got a remedy called Billy Goat Plum for that. Or, they're being a bit fearful. Every morning they get up, they're looking in their hair and combing and seeing if it's got any worse overnight. So that's the remedy the dog grows, dealing with a bit more fear that they're going to go bald as well. So, there are some things we can help on the physical level, try and slow down that process or even reverse it. But at the same time, we can also deal with how the man is reacting in that one. So it could be, we said, embarrassment. It could be self-esteem is going down, worrying, will they still be found attractive, if they're, single men, worrying about, will women still want to go out with me? And it seems a bit irrational to other people, but for the man who's going through that, they're quite often real emotions that they're having. So we can make it easier in dealing with things like baldness, as well as helping treat the actual condition.
What I think would be amazing or interesting, Ian, is we could create a device that could actually speak what the brain was thinking, because then you would realize what you have just said to our listeners is so true. A man looking at him, he couldn't be thinking about that. No, really, let's go ahead and hook something up and see or hear what those thoughts are. And it's quite amazing how much our thoughts sometimes really govern our lives and the choices that we make and how we feel emotionally.
And Daniel, something else you mentioned about how flower essence is working, when we talked a little bit about working on the emotional states. Another very important part where the essences work is on the subconscious level. By age 3, 90% of your beliefs are formed. So from conception to age 3, an individual has already made 90% of their beliefs informed. Now, it's on the subconscious level, so they're not aware of it. So
right.
Let's say, a young girl, 2 years of age, her parents separate, she never gets to see her dad again. As a result of that experience, she may have developed a belief that if you get close to men, they're going to leave you. She's now in her 30s and is very frustrated because all her relationships don't go the way that she was hoping it was. Men get transferred in work, or she's attracting men who've got a fear of commitment. And what's underneath that is that she has a belief that if you get close to men, they'll leave you. So she'll subconsciously attract those men who are likely to do that. And our beliefs will tend to run our life, till the day we die. And one of the beautiful things about the essences is they'll get there and they can alter those beliefs that we formed at a very young age. I'd much rather have my life being governed by, Ian White at, my current age rather than what I was, back at 2 or 3 years of age.
I think a lot of people do. It's funny when you'll be out there in the world, for instance, you see somebody, perhaps even a woman, and she's in her 60s running around in tie-dye and shorts, and you're thinking to yourself, that just doesn't become you. But as my wife would say, some people just get stuck at an age where they feel they were the happiest. They feel they were the best served at those times. So they hold on to that thinking that for the rest of their lives it'll perpetuate that, and they just don't realize if they really looked in the mirror honestly, it's like, it's time for a change.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those people who are afraid of change, and, which is ironic given it's the one thing we're guaranteed to get is change, there's a remedy called bottle brush, which it's originally from Australia, but you can get it now but in Europe and certainly the United States. And bottle brush is a great remedy for going through change. Now, whether that's situational change, it might be changing where you live, and certainly in the United States, it's got a reputation among its population for being very mobile. And then you talk to someone in the States, and invariably, they've lived in other states, probably more so than other people in other countries. So, changing jobs, maybe, the first time that someone's living with a partner, but it's also biological change. So it's a very good one for teenagers going into puberty. We've also got pregnancy, menopause, and of course, men have a menopause as well. You mentioned, midlife crisis, etc. There is a drop in testosterone in, for men around about the 50s. There's quite a marked biochemical change for men as well as women.
Now, it's really been, I guess, an experience because, for instance, my wife, who had actually introduced me to this, flower essences, what is this supposed to do? And so she began to actually implement, I guess, the therapy, if you will, on her own children. But rather than grabbing a bottle and making them open their mouth, because these are teenagers, and we all know that teenagers tend to resist what the adults want them to do. They're of their own mind and body. But she would actually slip it into juice they would drink. Now, it's okay to use this, like drop it into drinks that you normally drink?
Probably the most ideal is certainly, normal recommend on rising, retiring, on a clean mouth. But look, if that's the way to get them in, fine. And we've had examples where women have been in very abusive relationships, and they, for whatever reason, have chosen not to leave. And the practitioners have given essences to spike, their husband's orange juice. And one woman was very concerned that the husband might taste it and get aggressive. So it was put into his coffee. Now, you'd think a hot steaming mug of coffee would be the least favourable medium for an essence to work, and yet his behaviour changed. We've also had cases where women have spiked their husband's rum and cola, for example, as well. And one man was sitting there on the couch saying, they must be making it different. It tastes better these days. And their behaviour changed. So, so they still will work. We've also been donating the remedies to orphanages in Brazil for quite a few years now. Before we started doing this, on average, those orphanages, the kids were getting bronchitis at the rate of about 6 to 7 cases of bronchitis each child each year. And of course, lungs represents grief, so you can understand why there's getting so many lung problems. Now, there weren't a lot of people, to prescribe for all the children, so we were training the cooks there, and they're putting the essences in the food and also in their cordials. And after a year, the incidence of bronchitis had dropped to less than 1 case per child per year. So again, that's another way when it's not being put just directly in the mouth, but being put in the food or liquid.
I just found it real easy just to take a drop and just put it right under my tongue. That'd be pretty effective, wouldn't it?
Look, that's the easiest way. Now, our recommended dose is usually 7 drops when you wake up, 7 drops when you go to bed. And the nice thing about, I think, the bush essences, you don't have to take them 3 or 4 times a day. So you think, darn, lunch has come and gone. I forgot to take the remedy just before my lunchtime. So you just leave it by your bed. You don't have to keep carrying it with you. And, it's very, very easy to take. If you're dealing with emotional problems, we normally recommend a minimum of 2 weeks of taking the remedy. If you're dealing with more physical problems, let's say the bronchitis, then, we recommend usually a month of taking the remedy.
Now, as a naturopath, you're someone who really enjoys healing people through prevention. And I know that many times on our program we've had natural healing as a topic because we're finding that you're seeing a tremendous emergence of people getting back to where they should have been in the first place, which is through self-care, really taking care of themselves so they don't need to necessarily go to a doctor outside of a checkup. But too many of us fell into this habit of basically going about business, doing what we do, enjoying the habits we have to the point that it stresses our body down to where we need to see a doctor, and before you know it, there's a prescription, then there's a whole lot of, side effects, as was mentioned earlier, and before you know it, everybody's screaming and yelling and waving forks and knives and everything else in the pharmaceutical industry, which only simply exists because there was a need. Now, do you find that as this becomes more and more mainstream with the flower essences, have you been met with that establishment, that scientific establishment that tries to debunk and say, this is a lot of nonsense, but since it really isn't hurting anybody with any serious side effects, we just won't worry about it?
Well, in Australia we have the equivalent of the FDA, which is called the TGA, and we work very closely with them. And we're finding, certainly some of the pharmaceutical companies are aware that, looking at plant-based medicine, but they often try and synthesize it rather than, getting it directly from nature.
Well, it's more profitable. Well, that's the part of it, and the fact is, I know in the U.S. patent laws, you're not allowed to patent anything that can be found in nature, so what they try to find is, as you said, the natural active ingredient, synthesize it so then they can patent it and have ownership over it.
Yes, look, there's a friend of mine, and he was asked by the World Health Organization to chair a meeting between indigenous people, the healers of those tribes, and a lot of them were from the Amazon, and also from the pharmaceutical companies. And the meeting was halfway through when one of the major chemical companies, pharmaceutical companies everyone would know, said, look, we're not really interested in your knowledge. What we're interested in is patenting, something we can patent. And it was like at that point the meeting sort of died very quickly because they weren't really interested in cooperation. They're interested, well, what can we synthesize and patent? And I think one of the nice things with flower essences is if someone goes into a drugstore and they're feeling a lot of sadness because, their dog has just been run over or, someone close to them has died, what are they going to be given? An antidepressant. There's nothing dealing specifically with emotional states. So if a child is feeling a lot of rejection because, most of the kids in the class were invited to a birthday party and they weren't. So, if there's nothing you can get, you can't take a zinc tablet or a vitamin B or, a sedative or something to treat a child like that one. I think the flower essences are very specific. The other thing is that parents can prescribe the remedies for themselves and their children. They don't have to have gone to, medical college for 6-7 years to recognise when their child is feeling that rejection or that feeling guilt because, they were caught stealing something or they didn't help a friend out or something like that. So they're very specific and there's nothing else really addressing emotional states.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how mothers through the centuries were the healers of their children as well as their husbands, and they didn't need PhDs, and all of a sudden us has all been replaced by doctors and psychologists. So no longer can mothers do what they do naturally.
Well, yeah, and it's not just the medical establishment. It was actually started, that whole process, really, in the Inquisition when they were burning the witches. And
sure.
Of course, I've run workshops in Salem and up in Massachusetts. So it's interesting that. But basically, what they called witches were the traditional healers, which were the women in the family. Mm. So they were the first ones to do it. As the church tried to take healing from the families, from the women.
Now, what I like is... process. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was saying it's been a long process ever since. But, you're talking about, like going off to the doctors. I mean, men are pretty notorious for, that self-nurturing one. So it's probably just as well the women are there to do it. If you talk to whether it's a naturopath or a, general practitioner, a doctor, probably 80% of their patients are women. And I think that's something that we need to change for men's well-being to sort of, be a little bit more aware of our bodies and take control. And you mentioned stress, Daniel. This is probably one of the biggest killers. We've got a combination called calm and clear, and it's, if people come home, they're still uptight, they don't sleep very well, if they're, people in the lunch hours, they're on the phone, they're trying to eat a sandwich or something, they're not really settling. When you're stressed, blood doesn't go to your stomach, it goes to the muscles. So you're not going to get good digestion, so you're going to be, a bit low in nutrients, you're stressed, you're not going to sleep well because you're tense, your mind's thinking about lots of things. So I think, even at a very basic level of reducing stress levels, as you said, can help with blood pressure, with quality of sleep, better digestion. And we also have some of the remedies in sprays, which a lot of parents use for their teenagers. Open the bedroom door, don't close their eyes, spray, and then quickly close the door again. But, we have stories of, partners spraying, people spraying their partners when they come through the front door with the calm and clear, so they leave all the dramas and problems of work behind, become a nice human being for the rest of the family.
Wouldn't that be nice, instead of ducking into the pub? Now, what's really fascinating about the bush flower and the bush flower essences is there are quite a few books out there on this. And as you look through and you see the sketches, especially in yours here, bush flower essences, is that you have a lot of great sketches, but then you have some fantastic color photographs. And as you look at this, you realize this isn't really something that you can do like mass agriculture on, like giant greenhouses for this specific thing. But these can only occur, it would seem to me, and I won't say it's impossible, but would usually only occur in areas where they can only occur at.
Yes, we mentioned bottlebrush. There's a few plants, but you can transpose. But to get that full healing quality, a plant needs to be in the ground for at least 7 years. And you'll find that, I think, the bush essence has a reputation for working very deeply and very powerfully in terms of a modality of flower essences compared to other essences from around the world. And part of that is the harsh conditions in Australia. Like last year, probably 80% of the country was in drought. So for a plant to be able to survive that, and the drought's usually broken, of course, by floods, for a plant to be able to survive in those harsh environments, the life force of the plant has to be very strong. And, you won't, there's one flower which hadn't flowered for 40 years and only occurs in 2 very small areas. So you can't replicate that outside. And also, if you were to, cultivate seeds and water them and, give them nutrients, the life force is not going to be as strong as one growing in the wild, which has had to cope by itself. And they're the plants that I work with. I mean, there's 69 individual remedies, but I don't grow any of them. I go out into the wilderness areas and collect all of them. The other good thing about the modality of flower essences, you don't need a large quantity initially because you're diluting it down like with homeopathic. So you don't have to plant, thousands of acres of, boab, for example, to be able to make the remedies. So it's quite environmentally friendly. And we have many farmers in Australia who've heard about the essences, have written to me saying, look, I was going to clear, a large amount of land for planting crops by the side. There's all these healing qualities within that environment where I live, and I'm going to let it stay there so we can get to the point where there's going to be healing qualities of those plants available for the population.
It's encouraging that in the state that this planet is in, when we take a look at how our governments and our corporations have been in areas such as the Amazon or Africa or even Australia, and places that are very delicate in their ecosystems, and the endless drive for oil or minerals or precious metals, that as we've been tearing this place apart, I'm starting to experience, agree or disagree in your own opinion, that it's really beginning to change, that people are really beginning to realize it isn't just that the planet is delicate, but if it was just well stewarded like it should be, if we were just to take care of it as it should be, we would realize our own personal transformation and healing and the beauty that surrounds us. We would really be in more abundance than we would need as individuals.
I couldn't agree more with you, and I think the wisdom of the North American Indians, that be aware of your actions for not just yourself, but the generations which follow after you. Yes, I think if there was that consciousness amongst people on the planet, I think we'd be in a much better shape than what we found ourselves at the moment. Still, I'm very optimistic, and I think there's also an intelligence of the planet that's not going to allow us to get to the point where we totally destroy it. We're going to create harm for ourselves if we don't wake up.
I think we're beginning to wake up a lot faster than we thought we would, that's for sure. Now, how did you, become really interested in this? Was there just like one of them coincidental happenstances in your life?
Well, I mentioned, the family heritage, and
Right.
I grew up just about an hour out of Sydney in Australia, and my parents' property backed onto a national park, and my grandmother lived next door, and as a young boy, I much preferred spending time in the bush with her. And I should just mention that in Australia, the word bush refers to wilderness area, which hasn't been cleared, or, it's just wild, where a lot of people in America mightn't understand what that Australian connotation of the word bush. So, and as a young boy, I much preferred spending time helping my grandmother make her herbal remedies and bushwalking with her. So I'd wait till my father had gone off to work, and then I'd go to my mum, and I'd be doubled up in pain, pleading that I wanted to go to school even though I wasn't feeling very well. And she was doing work herself, so she'd think, "Oh no, I think you're too sick. You better spend the day with your grandmother." And,
Good job.
Yeah, well, I worked out that
it wasn't for homework. It's because I can learn more from my grandmother than I can from somebody I don't know.
Much more fun. And, I'd made these miraculous recoveries as soon as I worked out my mum had left for work. And I think my grandmother enjoyed having the company of me as well, because my mum would come home and she'd say to my grandmother, "How did Ian go?" And she'd say, "Oh, he gradually got better as the day went on." We go bushwalking, she'd point out the various plants and what their qualities were. So I think from that early age, I got an appreciation that with the plants there are specific healing qualities. Unfortunately, my great-grandmother, who did a lot of early research, my grandmother had already died before I was born. When I was 10, my grandmother went travelling to Europe, and unbeknown to the family, her body was riddled with cancer, and she was a very heavy smoker. But she kept the cancer bay of the herbs, but she got separated from her luggage, and they never found her suitcase, which had all the herbs. And by the time my father got all the plants that she needed in the right form, the stress of travelling, being without the herbs, took its toll, and she went into a coma and was flown back but never came out of it. And one of the tragedies was that none of that information was written down. And so I was more the legacy that the plants had healing qualities, and I ended up studying naturopathy and, I said, mainly a homeopathic kinesiologist. And then a friend had a young man I'd shared a house with, who was very successful in business, very charismatic, early 30s, diagnosed with bowel cancer. And he asked me, because I had an interest in meditation, and that if I'd run a healing circle the night before they operated on my friend. And all our mutual friends came over, and there was some prayers, directing energy, and the next day when they operated, I found out that the bowel cancer had spread to his liver, and that basically, there's nothing medicine could do. So I continued the healing circle, weekly in my home, and I started getting, shortly after he died, 6 months later, in the meditation, pictures of plants, told where to go and make them up, what their healing qualities were. So by then my practice was well established, and I started working the essences with my patients and getting great results. And for 2 years I told a number of colleagues, and we all started working with them to see if we could verify all that intuitive information. So that was the starting block for them. And when I became a naturopath, I thought it was strange no one was working with Australian plants, because the English system was available. And I thought, well, I know from my grandmother's, being with her, the plants have very strong healing qualities. And as I said, there's some unique features of Australia. It has the highest number of flowering plants in the world, also had the first flowering plants, and it's still a very pristine environment. So I think all those factors give a strong potency to the essences, and they seem to produce great results. You can get someone in the States or Europe using the essences, and they'll get equally as good results as someone in Australia taking them.
Yeah, that's what I came to understand, is that in Australia you literally have prehistoric flowers that are still thriving today. That's quite phenomenal, actually, when you consider it.
Well, if we looked at the world, say, 50 million years ago, there was basically two major land masses. And there was Eurasia, which was basically what the northern hemisphere is now. And then we had, it was termed Gondwanaland. So you had Antarctica, South America, Australia, Africa, India, Nepal, all joined together. And 50 million years ago, that started separating. And Australia was the last landmass to separate from Antarctica. And being an island, the plants which were established there at the time, which is, we're now talking 30 million years ago, grew up in isolation. So there was nothing, no plant or tree from another region came and took over. So the plants were very ancient in their form and still are.
Now, when it comes to someone who decides, this sounds fascinating, to just throw out a particular symptom, if you will, ADD, ADHD is one of those big ones you're really hearing here in America. Here's this that'll help that. And sometimes I think ADD this day and age is created because we have created so much distraction that it's hard to stay on one thing for any period of time. But as a young child growing up, I was diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, just hyperactive. But then again, sitting in a classroom for a couple of hours and learning mundane routines to me wasn't exciting. I wanted to get out and run around, and that's, how I was. But they started creating, very powerful drugs. In fact, I was taking a half dosage of a full pill. I believe it was Ritalin back in the day, but my mother finally said, I'm not doing this to my son anymore because she just didn't want a zombie. It was just that simple. We're going to figure out something else. And from that point on, I didn't go and see any psychologist. I just kind of went about my way. And growing into an adult, and of course, meditation was one of those things I started with that really kind of calmed me down and got me more focused. I think as you get older, it calms everything down. But taking a look at flower essences and let's say ADD, how does a person know if they go this route that they will see results? What kind of experience could you share with our listeners?
My recommendation would be, say the Cognos essence is very specific for all learning problems, whether it's the ADD or the ADHD, or, is also very effective in helping with difficulties, say, of autism. Now, if a parent wanted to trial that remedy, given there's no side effects, it's not very expensive treatment, by a month you would certainly know if things were improving. And if they hadn't, trial it for 1 month, and it should be quite apparent. We have parents ringing up in tears saying, I've got my child back, or, it's just the child is doing so well in school now, they're looking like they're going to have to repeat a year. The child hated going to school, and just dramatic turnarounds with that remedy. So there's a remedy called jacaranda, and it's for when there's poor attention and easily distracted. And as you mentioned, many very salient points about there's so much distractions in our culture. So you have a child who's got a little bit more of a tendency that way, they can get easily distracted. But fine motor coordination too. One of the things with boys, which are 90% of children diagnosed with ADHD are boys. Boys have a lot of testosterone. Testosterone stimulates the large muscles, and you said it perfectly. They want to be up there running around. We're also getting less male teachers for young children, so who probably don't appreciate the need for the boys to be a little bit more active. Also, by age 5, when children are starting school, girls are about a year ahead in fine motor coordination and verbal skills. So sometimes boys getting a bit restless, getting a bit bored, not being able to do things as well as the girls, can lead to sort of problems. The other thing is girls being better with verbal skills. If there is problems at home, maybe the parents are going through a difficult time, maybe they've separated, boys will tend to act out more to get attention because they're upset about the home environment, whereas girls are able to talk about what's going on with their girlfriends more. So some of these factors are also behind the scenes, but purely with the learning problems. So there's remedies for attention to detail. There's ones integrating the hemispheres of the brain, left and right, which if they're not integrated, by definition is dyslexia. All of these things are found in that Cognos essence, and you'll find that certainly within a month you should notice some differences with the child. And given there's no side effects, and the alternatives can be things like Ritalin, which you mentioned. Your mum didn't want you taking that, being like a zombie. We've had many parents saying, my child, their emotional development stopped the day they started Ritalin. And also the drug enforcement agencies in the United States have said that there's an alarming similarity between narcotics in the chemical composition of the Ritalin to that product. And studies have shown that children are more prone to developing cocaine use if they've had Ritalin in their childhood. So, here's something which is totally safe, no side effects, and my experience is far more effective.
I really, especially when I have enjoyable guests such as yourself on our program, try to approach something as holistically as I can, rather than just gunning through and say, okay, this will do this, to really give people an understanding, first of all, the bounty, the beauty of, ecology, as we've been talking about, the environment, and how, as we see what we see outside, is actually a direct result of what we see and feel on the inside. You can see how something like this, in its very subtle way, begins to kind of change the way you see and experience things.
Absolutely. And, I think it's a very stressful place, the world at the moment. I mean, people are very time poor. There's
information rich.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard someone say, I'm time poor but procrastination rich at the moment. I like the word. And, I think there's things where it's almost in some ways like with some of the remedies are meditation in a bottle. I think everyone would be much better if they meditated every day. You talked about your own experience and how that greatly helped you. There's even essences to help with the meditation experience, to open up the crown chakra, to help access one's intuition, which is your own inner guidance. But there's also some remedies which can work very quickly as well in very serious situations. We have a remedy called the Waratah, probably the most well-loved flower in Australia. It was the only flower the Aborigines gave to the white settlers. It was their highest flower. Now, this is a remedy we use for black night of the soul, despair, feeling suicidal. And it works very quickly. It's no good telling someone who's suicidal, take the flower essence remedy for 2 weeks. If you're still suicidal, continue. It grabs them by the scruff neck and pulls them back. And in Western countries like the United States, Australia, England, suicide is a major cause of death for men under 25. And if you think of how much pain someone's in, that killing themselves is their best option, it's nice that we can offer something else which is very powerful and very quick acting and safe and can change their perspective. I mentioned a flower that hadn't been seen flowering for 40 years. It's called the pink flannel flower. It's a wonderful remedy for children. Children come in very innocent and pure. Their heart chakra is wide open. Over time, they close down in dealing with, humanity. This remedy keeps the heart chakra open. But for an adult, it's like having a bit of rose-coloured glasses on, where rather than seeing the glass half empty, you see it half full. You have gratitude for the things in your life that we tend to take for granted, and we focus on more the negative things. So by having that more positive look, it's like, well, what is there in my life that I'm really grateful for? Because, you might have a sore knee, and you focus on your sore knee, and you forget, well, the rest of me is doing pretty good, Or, gee, I'm not really happy in my job. And you think, well, fantastic, I've got a job at the moment. I've got family who really love me and like friends I can, go out for a walk and appreciate nature. I mean, simple little things which can totally turn around and change the quality of your life because you start appreciating rather than focusing on a few of the things that maybe you're not so happy with.
In fact, getting back to your glasses half empty, glasses half full, look, be grateful that you have a glass to measure it in the first place.
Exactly. Yes.
Nobody ever seems to bring that part up. Now, Ian, because you extract these flower essences, as I understand it, you'll actually pick the flower, it's put into water, and then the sun basically leaches out the essence of the flower. Is that how that works?
Yeah, the vibrational quality of flowers released into water. And there's a point, it takes about 2 hours in Australia because we've got a lot of intensity of the sun. And at that point, you can notice the flowers go limp at that energy transfer at that point, yes.
And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because over the last few years, there was a film that was introduced that awakened people to a Japanese scientist, Dr. Emoto, and I guess it was about the energy of water or the intelligence of water. and it was featured in a specific movie. And what was interesting enough, believe it or not, it was the movie called What the Bleep, which I thought was cute enough, trying to describe to people what physics really is and how it would work to the common layman. But what was fascinating is my wife and I were sitting there watching, and I said, we'll be meeting him very soon. And I don't know why I would have said that. And I'd be darned, I was actually working at a radio station, and sure enough, there was our co-host at the time, says, I'm talking with this guy, Ciro Emoto. Do you know who he is? And we're like, see, there you go. So here we met this guy in studio. But what I'm finding clearly coming through from what you're saying and from these flower essences is it sounds like through a period of time that man has gotten to a point where they have been severed from their intuition, where they've been severed from knowing what's right for them, and we've surrendered that personal power over for others to take care of, instead of us. But it seems like we're coming full circle and we're beginning to reclaim that power back. Do you see that happening here?
I think we need to, and that intuition is our guiding force. I believe that before we, are born here, we've got a sense of what we want to achieve in our life and gifts that we're given to achieve that. And I think by listening to our intuition, we get our inner guidance to get a sense of what my life direction, what my purpose is. And certainly I would say one of the most painful experiences of practitioners having people who are so upset because they know there's something they're supposed to be doing, they just haven't found it. Mm-hmm. And how satisfying it is when you've got a sense that you're doing what you really feel you're meant to be doing. So, and if you don't follow that path, I think, life becomes quite hard. But just on that point of Emoto, for listeners who are not familiar with his work, he freezes various waters and then starts them to melt them. And he has a microscope and he takes photos of the crystalline structure of the water as it's starting to melt. So tap water, you can imagine, from a city like Tokyo doesn't have very much crystalline structure, but from a very beautiful water source like a sacred lake or well, it does. But then you've got water with great crystalline structure, and you put the words hate around it, and he found that something like that would destroy the crystalline structure. Or you can get tap water, and you can write the words love, gratitude, and it would transform the water into beautiful crystalline structure. We're 70% water. So if you're starting to have a lot of hate and anger and guilt, those emotions, what's it doing to the 70% of water in our body? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the beauty of flower essences. We can start to change that so it becomes more positive. Now, our whole body is going to be much healthier, let alone the emotional state. And as we said at the very beginning of the program, that 90% of our physical symptoms stem from emotional imbalances.
Which has been a fact that has been restated by doctors through this program, and pretty much anywhere you read, they say, if people could eliminate or at least reduce their stress significantly, I'd need to find something else to go do. It's amazing, isn't it?
Well, and it's not just stress, but it's the sadness we're carrying, or it's the resentment, or the guilt, all those things. So, yeah.
Now, Ian White, if you could, please give out a website people can find out more about Australian bush flower essences, because it's a fantastic website, a lot of great information there.
Thank you. And we do have, I run workshops around the world, and as we also have teachers who are running workshops in the United States. So if you go to www.ausflowers, now it's not OZ, it's AUS flowers.
Like Aussie, for instance, but AUS, right.
AUSflowers.com.au, and there's a lot of information. The photos you mentioned in the book, you can find beautiful photos of all the flowers, descriptions about them, where they can get them, and also, if they're interested in doing workshops or videos of the workshops, they can achieve those, and there's lots of books and other material out there. And I'd like to thank you very much, Daniel, for the opportunity of talking about the bush essences today.
You bet. Nothing like getting people, especially our listeners, to embrace the earth, because then they begin to embrace themselves. That's a fantastic way to be living. Ian White, thank you.
We have distributors in the States too as well, so they can readily get the essences there.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Bach flower essences were the first ones I was introduced to. So, interesting stuff. Well, anyway, again, Ian White, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you, Daniel.
You bet. So there's your opportunity. Heal yourself first and heal the world. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. That's the number 50. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. We also have this information about bush flower essences, so you can find out more about that, and we'll be sure to have hot links there as well in case you didn't write down the website information. We thank you for tuning in. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.